today, whenever you're going to be watching this, you're going to be getting to know someone that you've risen to every morning to go to work, Steve Kirk of WING, 25 years on the airwaves in the Dayton market, and tonight we're going to have a nice talk with him. Steve, thanks for coming over. And
Tula, my pleasure.
We want to go back to the very beginning of the Stephen Andrew Kirkpatrick story.
Stephen Andrew Kirkpatrick.
Tell us about him.
Born and reared, Tula, in the fabulous state of Massachusetts, in a small town called Holyoke, which at that time was about, maybe 60 or 65,000. Of course, when I left, went up to 150,000. See, they were glad to get rid of me.
They were so glad to get rid of you.
Born to a Irish-French family. Back in 1932 there, 1932. So basically I was born and reared in Massachusetts. Went to high school there and went in the service there.
Well, let's go back, excuse me for interrupting, but let's go back, where were you in the birth order? How many children were in your family?
Well, let's see, there's Bobby, Jimmy, Howard, Booty, that's what we call my sister Booty, Ann, then me, then Bruce, and then Danny. So I was the fifth, and then my mother had two more after me, see.
All right, and then you went to high school there?
I went to high school at good old Holyoke High. In fact, coming up shortly, they're having their 45th reunion. Now ask me if I'm going.
Do you plan to go?
No.
Why?
I hate reunions.
Why?
Oh, I just, I went to one, about 25 or 30 years ago. And there was this girl there, Tula, that I used to admire. And she was the most prettiest girl at good old Holyoke High, class of 49. Never took her out because, unbeknownst to a lot of people, I am a very shy man. You see.
Right, you are.
So I always wanted a date with her. Wait a minute. I always wanted a date with her, but never could get up the, the urge to go up and really ask her. So during the course of this reunion, I ran into her. And she didn't look anything like she did back in 49. I was crushed. So I never went back again. And I haven't, I don't intend to go back this time.
Okay. Then after you graduated from Holyoke High School, then where did you go?
Well, I graduated in June of 1949, and I was 17. In fact, I turned 17 in February, because you could go to schools in Massachusetts when you were like 4 and a half. So I turned 17 in February of 49, graduated in June, and I was hanging around the drugstore. And an old buddy of mine came down. It was a hot day in June. And his name was Don Cothart. I said, Don, where are you going? He said, I'm going to join the Air Force. I said, the Air Force? Why does this keep dropping? I said, the Air Force?
Maybe your tie is silk and it's slipping.
All right, maybe that's what it is. I said, the Air Force, you're going to join the Air Force. I said, let me walk you down, because in Holyoke you could walk anywhere, and be downtown within 5 minutes, you see. So I get down there, and he's going to join the Air Force. I said, what the heck? I'm going to try and join it myself. So I was never any good at tests, Oral tests, fine. Written tests, I was never any good taking a written test.
You would get a mental block?
I guess I would. Either that or I was just plain stupid, one or the other. So he's taking this test, and I'm taking this test.
Yes.
So the sergeant who gave us the test left, so I'm looking over his answers and going like this. I got to go in the Air Force. This guy flunks.
Oh.
Flunks the test. And I couldn't understand that. And there were two separate tests. And I'm copying the answers off, all multiple choice.
Right.
Number 1, A, I write down A, Number 2, B.
And you were peeking over on his paper all the time?
Peeking over on his paper. He flunks, I pass, boom, I'm in the Air Force.
And where do you go from there?
July in 1949, I'm down at San Antonio, Texas.
Okay.
In the heat of Texas. Have you ever been in Texas in the summertime?
Yes, it's horrid.
It's It's horrid.
And back then, they probably didn't have adequate air conditioning. No air conditioning
They had
at all.
no air conditioning at all. So here I am down in Texas, July 1949. And Tula, the temperature during the daytime is like 105, and I'm dying, literally dying. I go to the Air Force sick call, you know, and I've got heat rash all over me, all over me. You know what they said to me?
What?
Keep from sweating. Keep from sweating. So after
and how did they want you to do that?
I have no idea to this day. So after 6 weeks, I got yanked out of basic training. It was 13 weeks because they looked up my records and found out that I was a pretty good baseball player, and I was. So they took me out of basic training and put me on the Air Force baseball team, San Antonio Flyers.
Which position?
I was a catcher. And they put us in this separate barracks, and I'm in there with officers, and hey, I had a good deal. Here I was 17, and we used to fly all over the country and play these other Air Force bases in a C-47. Wow. Of course, you never heard of those, you know. They call them Goonie birds in the old days. So I did that. Then I went to Denver, Lowry Air Force Base.
And continued to play baseball?
Oh,
for
yeah.
the Air Force?
Yeah, I was the basketball manager and the baseball player. And in Denver, we used to have the battery out. That means catchers and pitchers. And we used to get ourselves in shape about the middle of February in the gym, you see. And so we won the Colorado State Championship and played in the NBC tournament in Wichita, Kansas. And a couple of scouts looked me over, but I had a few more years to go in the Air Force. Incidentally, I broke my leg, too, while I was playing, you know.
Right.
And this was just as the Korean War broke out.
Right.
And I had my uniform on, and I had a big cast on here and crutches, and they thought that I was a veteran of the Korean War, you know, just come back, you know. So everybody treated me like a king. See. I didn't tell them I broke my leg in a baseball game. So
you did or you didn't tell them?
I didn't tell them. Oh, no. So let's see.
When did you get out of the Air Force?
I got out of the Air Force in December of 1952. And while I was in the Air Force, I was down at Panama City, Florida, at Tyndall Air Force Base. And I went to school down there briefly at Florida State University. And I was commuting because Panama City to Tallahassee is about 90 miles. And I used to commute. And so when I got discharged, I went back to school up in Massachusetts at Springfield College, graduated, went down to Washington, D.C. at Catholic University, and got a master's degree in phys ed. And that is what I wanted to do.
You wanted to be a phys ed teacher?
Well, I wanted well, teaching in those days didn't pay a heck of a lot of money. I mean, even with a master's degree, you'd be lucky if you got $490 a month teaching.
This was in what year?
This was at about 1950, let's see, 1956. I graduated in May of 56.
So did you go on, how did you use your master's in phys ed?
I didn't. Didn't use it at all.
Not once?
Not once.
Then how did you get into broadcasting?
Well, now there's another story. I never went in a kid, you know, when I was a kid growing up, there were never these disc jockeys, you know, that you could listen to idolize. You know, they all had these soap operas, and there just were not any personalities on radio, you know, locally. Of course, they had the national shows, Jack Benny, as you well know, and all that. But it wasn't like it is today, where a kid would say, "Oh, gee, I like." I can't think of any local disc jockeys. Give me some.
Lee Riley.
Lee Riley, or the guy in Z20 in '93 there. I know him, but I can't think of his name. But anyway, we didn't have that in those days. You know what I mean? So I never listened to radio. I didn't want to be a disc jockey.
Whacker.
Yeah, Jeff Wicker. Jeff Wicker. Nice guy, by the way.
Yes,
and Kim, you know, Kim's over
Ferris,
there. Yep.
Right.
Anyway, my roommate, he was a fella named Lee Alt. And he lived in Shady Side, Ohio. which is right across the bridge from Bel Air, Ohio, which is right across the Ohio from Wheeling, West Virginia. It's down there in eastern Ohio.
This was your roommate in college? Or?
My roommate in college at in Washington. And he was studying radio and television. So he invited me to go to Shadyside for Easter weekend. And I said, no, Lee, I don't want to go to Shadyside, Ohio. I want to go back home. He said, come on, I want you to meet my mother and dad. So it was a kind of a short trip from Washington to Shadyside, Ohio, maybe 6-7 hours. And he had an old Cadillac. I remember that.
Shadyside, isn't that where they had the floods?
Big flood, the big flash floods.
Right.
Yeah, about 2-3 years ago.
Right.
So I went home with him there, and while we were there, he decided to take a few auditions at local radio stations. So I didn't have anything to do, so I went with him. So he went up to this one radio station, WTRX, in Bel Air, Ohio, which is way up on a hilltop. So he is in taking this audition, and I am talking to the secretary. Her name, by the way, was Susie Noyce. So I said, Susie, how does one take an audition? And she said, well, you go in there, you read a couple of commercials, you do some ad-libbing, you read a little bit of news. I said, it's a snap. I said, for the heck of it, when Lee comes out, I want to take the audition. And the general manager, it's a small station, the general manager at that time gave the auditions. His name was Frank Curtis. You can always remember these names.
Yeah, you're wonderful with names.
Frank Curtis. So Lee came out, I go in. And I wasn't serious at all. He gave me these commercials, and I'm reading these commercials and really putting a lot into it. Didn't know what I was doing.
You never, ever thought about getting into radio?
Never.
You had never taken not even one class in mass communications?
Never. Right. Never. Never thought I'd be a disc jockey. Never thought I'd be on television. And I did this as a lark because I wanted to get into sports of some kind, you know, which was my forte at that time.
And then what happened?
Well, to make a long story short, I came out and Frank Curtis came out and critiqued the both of us. And he said, hey, if I need you guys, I'll give you a call. We said, okay, nice talking to you. We get into his Cadillac and we go down to Wheeling and had a couple of Cokes, you know.
Sure.
Before we went to his mother's house. So we get home to his mother's house about an hour later. She says, hey, Steve, Frank Curtis called you up. So what did he want? He wants you to come back. He may offer you a job. I said, Frank Curtis of the radio station? She said, yes. So I said, Lee, let's go up. He goes up, he drives me up there, and Frank offers me a job for the summertime. For the summertime. So I said,
spinning records? Or
yeah, the morning show. Because the morning man is going on vacation. No, the afternoon show.
All right.
The morning man is going on vacation. The afternoon man is doing the morning show. I think that's how it worked. But anyway.
That's usually the way it's done.
So I said, no, I'm going back to Massachusetts. Because in those days, you know, you could get a job at the state mowing lawns. Because my aunt was head of the state police women in the state of Massachusetts. And there's another story.
I know, I remember you mentioning her.
Yeah, there's another story. In fact, I'll tell you that briefly if you have time.
All right.
How long is this show, by the way?
We have 28 minutes.
28 minutes left?
Right.
Oh.
No, we have 28 minutes all told.
All told. Tell him to put on another tape. So anyway.
So you get the job.
So finally, to make a long story short, I said, all right, I'll take the job only for the summertime. Because I'm going to go back to Massachusetts. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going back to Massachusetts.
Right.
Okay. So I go back to Washington. I graduate. I go back up to Bel Air, Ohio. And I get a room in Mrs. Neeb's boarding house. Oh.
Tell us what it was like being on the radio then. When you.
It was terrible.
It
was terrible.
We had week, your first month.
You know, they had. My biggest thing was we used to carry the Cleveland Indians baseball games, you know? And the first 4.5 innings were local. You had to put in your local commercials. And of course, any time they paused for station ID, you had to cut the network off and come in with your own IDs, you see.
Right.
And then the last half was out of Cleveland. Cleveland. They would put in their commercials, you know, from Cleveland, and you carried them.
Local.
Yeah. And but when they paused for a commercial or for an ID, you'd have to come in locally.
Right.
And they change off and on. You know, it's either the first 4.5 or the last 4.5.
You might explain to the viewing audience what you mean by ID.
Identification, station identification.
Such as, give us a...
Well, this is WTRX, Bel Air, Ohio, the voice of the Indians. You know, something like that. And so one afternoon, it's hot as a son of a gun outside. And I'm in there alone. I mean, I open up the station, I close the station.
Right.
It's hot, no air conditioning, so I open the front door and I got this big seat, you see. So we have the last half of the game.
Yes.
You got me covered?
Yes.
We start doing the local commercials and the IDs after 4.5 innings.
Right.
Tula, I'm through about the 4th inning. I fall asleep.
Oh.
I fall asleep. I wake up about the 8th inning. In the meantime, they're getting all these commercials out of Cleveland.
Yes.
None of our local stuff.
Oh.
Plus, the station IDs are out of Cleveland. Well, now we pause for a local station ID, you know, WEWS Cleveland. When they're listening to Bel Air, and here I'm sleeping away.
It's a miracle you didn't get fired on your first job.
And another
from
time.
There, which station did you go to?
From there?
From there.
From Bel Air, I went to WCOL in Columbus. But let me just reiterate something here. I was only going to stay for the summertime. You got me covered?
In Bel Air, right.
In Bel Air.
Yes.
But I met this blonde.
Yes.
After about 3 weeks there. And her name was Jeannie Kaiser. Met her in May, and we got married there in October.
In Bel Air?
In Bel Air, Ohio.
And out of that union came how many children?
Well, that was way down the road yet. Then I went to Columbus. I stayed in Bel Air 2.5 years.
All right.
Then I went to Columbus. Tootsie, that was her name, Tootsie. Tootsie was a banker. Now, let me go back and diverse a minute. Remember I told you about Lee Ault?
Yes.
Lee Ault never got in the radio. He married Susie Noyce, whose father was a big banker in Bel Air. So. Tootsie worked at that bank.
All right.
And Lee became quite he had an advertising agency in Columbus. In fact, one of his accounts was the Ohio State Fair. I haven't seen him in years.
Oh.
Now, isn't that a little
yes,
story?
That's a nice
right
story.
there?
Let's get on now with COL. How many years were you at COL? Let's get you up here to Dayton.
All right. I was at COL. I got there in September of 1958.
All right.
September of 58.
What year did you arrive in Dayton with WING?
September of 1966. Everything I ever did was in September. I don't know why.
Between COL and Columbus and WING,
I was at WSAI.
in Dayton, you were at SAI
WSAI
in
Cincinnati.
And while you were there, you had some experiences with a new singing group called the Beatles. Tell us about that.
Well, let's see now. We brought the Beatles in 1964, and it was such a joyous event. But I'll tell you the truth, I never thought we were going to get them.
And where were you in 64?
In 64, I was down at WSAI.
In Cincinnati?
In Cincinnati. This happened to be in February of 1964. 5 of us are sitting in the announcer's lounge. Mm-hmm. And Bobby Harper says, hey, I think we can get the Beatles to come to Cincinnati. I said, oh, baloney, you're not going to get the Beatles. He jumps up, grabs the phone, calls the William Morris Agency, and I'm a son of a gun, Tula. We booked the Beatles into Cincinnati, August 27th, 1964.
Was this the first time that the Beatles came to the United States?
The first time the Beatles came to the United States for a concert tour.
Yes.
And we had to come up with $12,500, which was half of the money They wanted $25,000 plus a percentage of the gate. So they came into town August 27, 1964. And they had a big press conference. And I was sitting in one of the small rooms in the Cincinnati Gardens. And the 4 Beatles were in there with me.
Yeah.
I said, what the heck? I might as well get some kind of a souvenir. I wanted their autograph. But I didn't have any paper or anything, so I took out my wallet, and there was a $1 bill, my only $1 bill. And I said, hey, fellas, how about autographing this $1 bill for me? He said, yeah, they autographed the $1 bill, you know. Shoved it back in my pocket. I kept it in my pocket for about, 3 or 4 weeks.
So you're probably the only person in the whole world that has a $1 bill with the original autographs of each one of the
No, a couple
Beatles?
of other jocks did the same thing.
Did they?
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, let me show you some pictures of that glorious moment, August 27th, 1964. Now, these are original pictures. You cannot buy these. These were taken by a private photographer. This, of course, is Ringo playing the drums. And you know, in those days, all their equipment could have been put on a pickup truck.
All of it?
All of it. Nowadays, if they were to come into town again...
Who's in this picture?
This is John, George, and Paul. They're on the stage there at the Cincinnati Gardens. Now, we go to 1966. I was still at WSAI in Cincinnati. And had a chance to bring, and incidentally, in 1965, I went to Kaminsky Park and saw the Beatles perform there.
Oh.
And went backstage and they saw me. I had a chance to bring them back in 1966. A very interesting story. If you've got a minute, I'll tell you about it. In 1966, Dino St. Angelo, who was a local promoter out of Cincinnati of those years, he has since passed away, Dino St. Angelo and I got together and we promoted the Beatles again in August of 1966 at Crosley Field. And we brought them in for $75,000. But if you remember, Tula, back in 1966, John Lennon came out with the Beatles were more popular than Jesus Christ.
Right.
Remember that?
I remember that, yes.
So all the people took that very literally and very seriously.
Yes.
And they wanted ban the Beatles. Radio stations come out and said, ban the Beatles. Don't play any more Beatle music. Well, our tickets plummeted. Went down next to nothing. So I got on the phone and I literally talked to Brian Epstein,
yes,
the Beatles manager, for about 45 minutes. And got the Beatles down from 75,000 to 60,000. So the night.
Quite a cut.
Quite a cut is right,
yes,
but we needed it because we paid $60,000 for the Beatles up front.
Oh, they were.
In that contract, you had to have 125 police officers as security.
Heavy security, yes.
So they came into town, and I arrived down at Crosley Field around 4:30 or 5. The skies were gorgeous. Not a cloud in the sky, Tula, you see. And I'm sitting in the dugout of Crosley Field, and I'm looking over the infield and the outfield. Yes.
Could you just, for our younger viewers who may not remember Crosley Field, tell that's what happened at Crosley Field? I mean, the Reds played there, right?
Oh, the Reds played there for 1,000 years.
This was before Riverfront Stadium.
Before Riverfront Stadium.
Okay.
And Crosley Field was a beautiful field in those days. And so I'm looking out, Tula, and something isn't right. I can't put my finger on it.
Yes.
And then it started misting.
Oh.
The rain started coming down a little.
How many minutes before the performance was this?
About an hour and a half.
Oh.
And somebody came up to me and said, hey, where is the tarpaulin? Tarpaulin? Dino, where's the tarpaulin? My gracious, I sent it back because I thought it would never rain and we could save $400.
Right.
I said, Dino, go get the tarpaulin. We got to have the tarpaulin. It's part of the contract. The contract stated, this show goes on rain or shine, provided you have a tarpaulin that covers the equipment, and all the equipment is out around second base.
Yes.
Dino goes scurrying out trying to find a tarpaulin. Try and get a tarpaulin on Saturday night. The rain is starting to come down hard.
Yes.
And I kept getting up on stage saying, it won't be not long now, ladies and gentlemen. The concert won't be long now.
Yes.
Make a long story short, Tula, the concert is canceled because we cannot find a tarpaulin.
Oh, how devastating that was.
Devastating is right. And we're in the underground of Crosley Field, and the New York promoters saying, this show is canceled. Well, if they would have canceled that show, Tula, my name would be Steve Kirkanakovich, and I'd be a little guy sitting right now in Winnipeg, Canada. I would have fled the country because there was no way that we could have made expenses.
Certainly.
Because we already gave the Beatles $60,000.
Right.
We still had to pay for $125,000 for the off-duty police officers.
$125,000?
No, 120. We had to pay for 125 police officers.
All right.
We had to pay for Crosley Field. We had to pay the ticket takers, the ushers, you name it. We had to pay all that. Because there was only 18,000 people in the stands.
Well, I know you didn't go to Canada, so what happened?
Okay, we're having this wild, hairy, horrendous discussion underground. Finally, John Lennon said, hey, wait a minute. I know this guy. He brought us in 1964. He showed up at Kaminsky Park in 1965, and he's bringing us in again 1966. Now, let's just calm ourselves. Where are we playing tomorrow? Somebody said St. Louis. How far is that? He said, about an hour. Okay, we're going to play here tomorrow afternoon at noon. I said, John, could you make it at 1? Because, you know, a lot of people go to church.
Right.
They said, all right, this concert is going to come on at 1 o'clock. Okay, Tula, now we had to go out and get another 125 police officers for Sunday. You couldn't get the same police officers then because they were on duty Sunday.
Right.
So Dino went out to get 125 police officers. In the meantime, we were staying, or the Beatles were staying at the Vernon Manor in Cincinnati. It had the top floor.
All right.
So I went up there, and while Dino was preparing, thank goodness Crosley Field was not rented, so we got that back. So I'm up there playing poker.
With the Beatles?
With Ringo.
Oh, really?
Took $5 from me. Not only did I lose all that money. So anyway, the next day, it was beautiful. Here are some of the Beatles coming on to Crosley Field. Notice you can see Ringo, you can see some police officers standing there, see photographers. I am in there someplace.
All right.
Okay,
And the sun
Sunday.
is shining because
the sun is shining.
I see shadows.
It's a beautiful day. But we still only drew 18,000 people. So I lost, along with Dino, we lost $9,000 apiece. You are looking, Tula, at the only promoter, probably in existence, that ever lost money on a Beatles concert.
Not something to be too proud of.
Why not? Who else has done it? Who else did it?
Then after, was that the last time you brought the Beatles in then?
That was the last time. Then I had to get a job.
Then you
So
had
I had left WSAI to promote full time.
Oh.
Well, you lose $9,000 on a promotion.
That burns you.
Burned you.
Burns you bad.
You got to get a job. But fortunately, the very next month, I brought in the Righteous Brothers in the music hall and picked up about $5,000 profit on it. But I still needed a job.
What about, when did you bring in the Rolling Stones?
Rolling Stones, 1965. Brought the Rolling Stones into Hara Arena in 1965. Then the next day, down to the Cincinnati Gardens.
All right. So now, what year did you start at WING?
Started at WING in 1966, in September of 1966.
And by that time, you and Toots had how many children?
We had two gorgeous children. Casey, Kimberly Carroll, who is now studying for her PhD in English Lit at St. Louis University, presently teaching at Parks Aeronautical College.
Great.
She's 31. Amy married an Army officer,
Yes.
living in Texas. She is 28 and hates it.
Hates Texas.
Hates Texas. Hates Texas. Must take after her old man.
Oh, right.
Yeah, because I told you when I was down there
Right.
at Tyndall, or at Lackland. And so they are, I'm not married now, you know.
I know.
So they are doing quite well. And
Well,
they
it
call
sounds
up,
like it.
they call up their dad. Casey still calls me collect.
Oh, does she?
She's more economical than you are.
Well, tell us then, all of your years at WING, you were involved in how many different community functions?
I would say that I have done maybe 15 to 20,000 hours of free public service.
Oh, that's...
That amounts to maybe 5,000 personal appearances. I know I have done at least 4,500 dances, teen dances, class reunions, weddings. Now this is going back from September of 1956.
Mm-hmm. And you retired from Wing in 90...
I retired from Wing in September of 1991. See, September again.
All right.
I should have been born in September.
Tell me about some of the new technologies that you've seen through the 25 years you were at Wing.
You mean the 36
in radio.
years I was in radio? I would say the biggest technology improvement or expansion or whatever you want to call it was the cart machines.
CART stands for cartridge,
CART
for those who
stands
aren't
for
in the
cartridge.
business.
Prior to then, we used to have, and the engineers will know what I'm talking about, magnacorders. Magnacorders recorders are called magnacorders. I think I got that terminology right.
And all the commercials were on these magnacorders.
These were reel-to-reel machines. And so all your commercials and all your promos were on these reel-to-reel.
Yes.
And the biggest breakthrough, I think, was about 1959 or 1960 when these cart machines first came out.
Right.
Because when you were doing a disc jockey show, you had these magnacorders stacked up behind you, 3 of them. And while a record was playing, you had to rewind all those 3 machines and put on the commercials. One commercial here, and we always ran 2 commercials and a promo in between records. You got me covered?
Yes.
Plus your personality.
Yes.
So, and then as you're talking, didn't have remote control switches where what they have now, where you could just hit a button.
Right.
As you're talking and you're ready for the commercial, you had to turn it on by hand. But unfortunately, they were behind us. I don't know why. So you're talking on the air. Thank goodness we weren't on television. As you're talking on the air, you turn the recorders on. And when the commercial's over, you hit the other one and you hit the promo.
And you do this almost like blind?
You did blind, but you did it,
Okay.
automatically. Well, there were a lot of this tape was so old that a lot of it broke. So you still had to get up, splice this tape, rewind it, and don't forget, in those days, the records were only like 2 minutes and 5 seconds. It was a rarity you had a record in those days that lasted 3 minutes. Oh, rarity.
What if you had a phone call from the program director? How would you answer that?
You wouldn't answer it.
You just
You didn't
wouldn't.
take phone
You
calls.
just
The
didn't
program director never called you. You know why?
Why?
Because you never answered it. You never answered it. And if he did, if the red light went on, you pick it up and say, I don't have time to talk to you, boom. That's it. Because you're too busy.
Yes, I could see.
So when the cart machines came out, what a blessing! Because you put the cart in the cart machine, boom! You hit a switch on the control board. That was it. It was like you died and went to heaven.
I'm sure
That was the
it all-
biggest, I would say, the biggest breakthrough. And now nowadays, a lot of your stations are all computerized.
Right.
I mean, not a vast majority of them, but I would say 10 to 15% of your radio stations are now computerized. You don't do anything. You just, boom, that's it.
Well, I know that there are several in this market that are totally computerized.
There are. So that is the biggest, I would say, breakthrough in my day in radio.
When you did retire, what what did you want to do after you retired?
I want to do nothing. That's why I retired. Want to do nothing.
You worked with so many people at WING, some who went on to bigger and better fame.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm thinking of the one comedian that went to Texas, or the one.
Well, the biggest comedian was Jonathan Winters.
Oh, right.
Jonathan
Did you ever
Winters.
work with him?
No, I didn't.
All right.
Jonathan Winters was a disc jockey at Wing many years before I got there, but his mother was the head bookkeeper at our Springfield station.
Oh.
And I used to, see, we owned like 5 or 6 radio stations.
Great Trails.
Great Trails did, yeah. And I used to go up to Springfield, and Mrs. Winters looked exactly like Jonathan and was funnier. Was actually funnier.
Funnier.
Funnier. And she paid me a heck of a compliment one time. I was up there, and she was telling me how funny I was on the air.
Oh.
She says, even funnier than my son. I said, you got to be kidding me. Me more funnier than she says, you are.
Oh,
and so that was it. But George Carlin.
He worked at Wing?
George Carlin did not work at Wing, but he worked for our Boston radio station and married a nurse in Dayton. And I came out of the studios one time, and this is when we were on West First Street, and there's George Carlin sitting there. But we had some.
Jack Weimer. You worked with Jack.
Oh, Jack. Oh, yeah. Jack, of course, a perennial favorite.
Right.
On Wing. Of course, he did The Man on the Street for about 50 years. Jack and I were very, very good friends.
Yes.
And we had, when the Red Sox played the Cardinals in 1967, see, we owned the station in Boston.
Right.
And Mr. Williams,
that's
who
Alex
was
Williams.
Alex's
his
dad.
Father?
Alex's dad.
All right.
Was the president of Great Trails, and he knew that I was such a great Red Sox fan.
Yes.
That he sent Jack and I up to the Boston station to do interviews around Fenway Park and send all that, and we did the show. We did the show from Boston in their studio. In the morning show.
You
Yeah,
did the
Jack
morning
kept
show?
feeding me the commercials and the records and all that stuff. Oh, yeah, it was a great inspiration.
Wow.
And he and I, and the station manager at that time, was a former FBI agent. So he knew everybody in Boston. And we used to take a limousine to Fenway Park. Oh, I can tell you 1,000 stories about Jack Weimer and me.
Yeah.
Nice stuff.
You know, I know your heritage is Irish and French. Have you ever been to Ireland?
Yes. I went to cover the Irish St. Patrick's Day Parade in Dublin, Ireland, one year. Jim Bennett was our station manager at that time. Nice guy.
Yes.
In fact, he's the one that hired me.
Yes.
He and
Jim's
Jerry
a well-respected broadcaster.
Yes. And they sent me to Dublin, Ireland one year. I forget what year. But it must have been around 1979, maybe 1980. And I did the St. Patrick's Day Parade. I'll tell you something. It was great, but our parade that I was head of in Dayton was bigger and better.
Really?
Yes.
Bigger than Dublin?
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
getting back to the Dayton St. Patrick's Day Parade, I know Dale Hoffman of the Dayton Daily News and you got that together. Jim Baldridge from Channel 7 would march in it. Tell us about it.
I got that parade
You
together.
got it. All right.
I got it together. John King and Stephanie Durup
Yes.
said, hey, we ought to get this parade going. So our first parade was very, very small, but I got all these guys to participate.
Right.
Then the second parade, my second wife, Claudia,
Yes.
did about 95% of the work, and I got all the credit. But she did about 95% of the work, and did it for about 6 years, and we had a
fine job.
Oh, fine job. And then we, got divorced. That was a lot of work, and I didn't want to do it anymore. So,
and that's why we
and I
don't
wasn't
have
about to get married again to,
Just
to do the parade again.
Right,
so,
but those were fun days. Those were
yeah.
wonderful Irish Day Parade, St.
Beautiful.
Patrick's Day Parade.
We had fine weather sometimes and nasty weather, but we were out there. But Dale Huffman, he'd come out to every parade, and Jimmy Baldridge, Carl Day, the whole gang, they were all out there. I mean, we had great response from the city of Dayton, and the people came out. It was fantastic.
Do you miss not getting up at 3:30 in the morning?
No, I hated it when I did it. I hated it when I did it.
Is that the time you had to arise in the morning?
When I was in Cincinnati, let me reverse back. When I was in Cincinnati, I commuted for 13 years. 13 years, because I did not want to take my girls out of school.
Right.
So I used to get up at 3:20. I'd leave the house at 3:40, and I was on the air at 5. And this was before I-71 was completed.
I-75?
No, I-71,
71?
because I used to take that to go through I-71. And before I-75 was completed. I-75 wasn't completed all the way through downtown. But to answer your question, I hated getting up at that hour. And I never got used to it. Never.
So now that you're retired, how do you spend your time?
I spend my time rollerblading, biking, keeping myself in great shape. Feel that muscle. Feel a muscle.
Oh, that's a muscle.
I'm on a rowing machine every day.
How many miles do you rollerblade?
Well, sometimes 10, 20. I am the voice of the Dayton Bombers.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
I do the Bombers. We start our, that's the PA work now. That's not on radio.
The public address.
Public address announcer.
They're at Hare Arena.
At Hare Arena. We got 34 home games this year. We should have a great team. And it's a great organization, and I'll be there the 19th of October.
And that will keep you tied up
Keep me
for
tied
several
up
months?
Well, oh yeah, at least until, well, we'll get in the playoffs.
Well,
I'm very
it
optimistic.
wouldn't be a Bombers game if Kirky was not saying, I can't hear you.
That's right.
I know. I've had season tickets to the Bombers game for several years. And you know, you are really enjoying retirement.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
You do travel too?
Yes. In fact, this time last year, through the cooperation of the Dayton Ski Club, I went to New Zealand with the gang, spent 10 days in New Zealand, and you know, the winter is there now, so we went skiing, and
that must have been an experience.
Ah, it's beautiful. Yeah. New Zealand is absolutely gorgeous. Then I went over to Australia for a week.
And how was Australia?
Absolutely beautiful. Just beautiful. People are so nice, so friendly. And I go to Florida a lot.
You like the water, don't you?
Love the water.
Yes.
In fact, I almost bought a boat and lived on the water.
That was one of your dreams, wasn't it?
Still is.
Right.
It still is. Of course, I'm not getting any younger. I just turned 49. You know.
What do you say for anybody who might be thinking about getting into the business, to the broadcast
business?
I
told you not to ask that question. Hey, fine, let him get in it. I enjoyed it. Let him get in it. That's all I can say.
Well,
I had some good times in it, but I'm glad that's over. I'm glad that part of my life is over. I spent 36 years. I'm the kind of a guy, I don't believe that you should have your whole life wrapped into one thing, one occupation. I don't believe that.
I agree. Yeah.
And so I spent I spent too much time. I should have got out when I was a lot younger and get into something else. But it was so easy. This business, as far as I'm concerned, is so easy. It was easy for me. So, and the money was good. I was making good money.
Right.
So I just stayed in it.
For 36 years.
Well, the money didn't come, the money wasn't that great in 56. I mean, I started out making $290 a month.
My.
And then my biggest pay, and I was one of the top disc jockeys in Cincinnati, I was only making $180 a week. And
that was back in the early 60s?
It was back around 1964. Well, I wasn't making $200 a week when I left. I was making all my money doing personal appearances, these dances and everything. This is where you make the money.
Sure.
In all these commercials I was doing.
Well, Steve, with Kirky, I want to thank you so much for being with us.
This is it, huh?
You've really, you know, you've shared some experiences with us that we would not have known. It's nice to know the real Steve Kirk, and I wish you well in your retirement.
Thank you very much.
Have a good life. You're enjoying it.